All right, welcome everyone to today's episode of the Jyotish Network. I have my colleagues Sandeep and Jyotish Light Bullock with us. Uh, thanks a lot for all your comments and feedback and likes. Please make sure that you keep liking and subscribe to our channel if you have not already. And also, please send your feedback in comments. It really helps us to keep going. And today, the agenda is we are going to continue with our series on wealth and dhana yogas. And we are bringing a very interesting concept, which is called the yogi principle. And there you go.
Yeah, and thanks, KP. I would just want to add that given that this is a sort of relatively not so known concept, the format of this episode will be that we'll let our expert Sandeep just give a broad context of what this principle is in terms of a high level theoretical background, and we'll then spend some time looking at a couple of examples, and we'll try to keep it more free flowing into a conversational kind of a format so that users and listeners and viewers can derive the maximum benefit out of it in an easy to understand way. So with that, Sandeep, over to you. And yeah.
Thanks, Bullock. Thanks, KP. All our viewers, welcome back. Uh, we thought of sharing something a little different, something which is not really become mainstream Jyotish, or at least popular Jyotish as yet. It's a contribution by an astrologer who's more recent in the sense about 70, 80 years ago, he did most of his work. I'll introduce you to him and the concept of yogi. Now, just a top line, condition star mark that I want to share before we do this is the yogi principle applies to all charts in the Vimshottari dasha. That's number one. So if you're applying a conditional dasha, it may not be applicable in conditional dashas. Sheshadri Iyer, the author of this particular concept, kind of said that Vimshottari Dasha is the only Dasha that he used, and so all his methods were based on the calculations and derivations basis the Vimshottari Dasha. Second is that the yogi point of wealth, as it is called, is only for prosperity, right? It's a planet which acquires a different meaning within the chart besides its natural significations, house lordship, etc. This is a new character that the planet acquires by being the yogi of the chart, related only to prosperity. Prosperity in terms of money, prosperity in terms of wealth, right? Not necessarily in terms of status and power, which Raj Yogas typically do, what we did in a couple of episodes before. So this is purely a point of prosperity, and a planet, when identified as a yogi in its dasha or antardasha, is capable of bringing prosperity into the person's life. So, without much ado, uh, I think most of our viewers would remember the last episode on Dhan Yogas, where we spoke about various combinations. I just want to bring to point that these remain valid, right? So if you have a planet who's a yogi and participates in dhan yogas or other auspicious and beneficial yogas in a chart, the better it is, right? So it keeps getting strengthened. The planet is kind of getting stacked for multiple benefits, and when those periods run in a person's life, they become completely transformative in terms of wealth and prosperity. So here we go. Let me introduce to you. So Sheshadri Iyer, the gentleman whose picture is on the screen, Sheshadri Iyer was a mathematics scholar based out of Bangalore. He did a lot of his research based on charts and documents which were in the libraries of the Maharaja of Mysore. He had access to them. He was able to, see some of the charts, some of the writings of contemporary old, astrologers, and kind of then derived he derived a calculation basis which he arrived at what is called the Iyer yogi, and then kind of applied it to multiple charts. So his approach was again to have a principle, apply it to thousands of charts, and see how it works over a period of life for people, and then concretize something and offer it to the world. So he did that in his famous book called The New Techniques of Prediction by Seshadri Iyer. All our readers, all our viewers can, of course, access that on Amazon and find out some details themselves. What I will cover is some very basic points. We will not go into too many technical details, for which, of course, you can write in on the comment section to us when you like, subscribe the video. You can also mention in comments if you want to learn more, and we'll be happy to come back to you. So diving into it, the principle of Tithi calculation uses the concept of the degrees, the longitudes of the sun and the moon, and various mathematical operations are carried out to arrive at various Tithis, Gana, Guna, etc. in the Panchang as well. So he extends that principle and adds a year constant. So what he's done is, the notation is 6 signs, the sun's degrees in this chart, reference chart of Lillian Bettencourt. The sun has crossed 6 signs. So he's crossed 6 signs. So we write 6S. It's at 4 degrees, 24 minutes. So we write 4 degrees, 24 minutes. And so that's how the notations will always come across. We write the moon's degrees and we add both of them. Now, when we add them, every time minutes go beyond 60, we reduce 60 and add it to 1 degree. We increase the degree by 1. And if the degrees cross 30, we reduce 30 from whatever the total is and add 1 to the sign. So here we would get a total of 65. So when you reduce 60 from that, you're left with 5 minutes. That's how the 5 minutes has come. Since 60 minutes got transferred onto the degree side, this 19 has now got added to become 20 degrees and 12 signs. Now, whenever we get 12 or more, right, we reduce 12 from that. So if we were to reduce that, we would have got, here itself, we would have got 0. But I didn't do that. I kind of just kept the maths there, added the Iyer constant of 3 degrees, 3 signs, 3 degrees, 20 minutes. This is the Iyer constant. I call it the Iyer constant because that's the number which gets added every time. And you arrive at another, longitudinal number. We reduce 12 here, and we have a remainder of 3 signs, 23 degrees and 25 minutes. So since 3 are completed, remember we said 6 completed, so 6 signs meant 6 signs completed, 4 degrees, 24 minutes in Libra. Similarly, 3 signs completed, 23 degrees, 25 minutes, now means Cancer, 23 degrees, 25 minutes. So 3 is Cancer. So in Cancer, on 23 degrees, 25 or 26 minutes lies the Yogi Point. Right? In the chart, in your software, if you switch on the Yogi Point function, it is indicated in the chart as to in which sign the Yogi Point lies. Now, having arrived at the Yogi Point, how do we arrive at who is the Yogi? Now, in Cancer, 23 degree 25, we then identify which nakshatra is in this particular point. And the lord of that nakshatra then becomes the Yogi. Right? So the Yogi in this chart is Mercury, because in Cancer 23, 25, 26, the nakshatra that is there is owned by Mercury. So Mercury becomes the Yogi for the chart. Now, since it is falling in Cancer, the owner of the bhava in which the Yogi Point lies becomes the duplicate Yogi. So Cancer is owned by Moon, so Moon becomes the duplicate Yogi. There is the concept of the opposite of a Yogi, right? So while Yogi is the bestower of prosperity, there is also the planet, which is the Avyogi, the opposite of a Yogi, who is a troublesome planet who brings maybe ups and downs, uncertainty, some kind of wavering patterns as regards as prosperity is concerned. The other functions of that planet, the other results that it is supposed to give remain where they are. A very simple way, 2 ways to calculate the Avyogi is that you have the Yogi Point To the yogi point, you add the Iyer constant for arriving at Abyogi, which is 6 signs, 6 degrees, 40 minutes. And then the mathematics that you get, we go to the same principle of arriving at that nakshatra, and the lord of the nakshatra becomes the Abyogi. A simpler shortcut route for all our viewers is when you arrive at the yogi, in this case, Mercury, now bring back the Vimshotri Dasha sequence in your mind. Inclusive of Mercury, count 6. So we'll go from Mercury, we'll go to Ketu, we go to Venus, we go to Sun, Moon. The sixth is Mars. And Mars is the Abyogi for this particular chart. The trine written here is simply the 3 nakshatras which are owned by the yogi. These nakshatras become important because all planets falling in these nakshatras also take on the additional quality of behaving like a milder yogi and can become planets on whose dashas and antardasha prosperity can be experienced. So I kind of take a pause, Pulak and KP here, and just want to know if there's something you want to clarify or something you think would be a question at this point in time so far, whatever we've discussed on any of the viewers' mind.
Yeah, I think one thing I would like to add, because some of the viewers and listeners might be completely new to Jyotish or Vedic astrology. Uh, the I mean, the point is not to get overwhelmed with this math that Sandeep just mentioned. I think if you just visualize that there are 12 zodiac signs, and you know, each sign is comprising of 30 degrees, and each degree comprises of 60 minutes, right? And so it's a simple addition like we learned in school, where if you do sort of add the digit in the last place, add 2 digits, then one carries forward to the next, place, decimal place. And so it's something like that, in the sense you add the minutes up. If the minutes exceed 60, that means the degree is getting added, one more degree is getting added. So you carry forward 1 degree and then add it to the degrees. If the degrees exceed by 30, then one sign is getting added and you carry forward one to the sign. I think that's the way. And the reason why 12 signs are getting subtracted, uh, once we add the yogi constant, is because there are 12 signs in a chart, right? So in a way, you're sort of completing 360 degrees, you're completing full circle, and you're sort of resetting the rotation in that sense. So I just wanted to clarify this, but thanks, Sandeep.
I
I
think
think,
that's very important, Pulak, because this is something which confuses a lot of people, and especially if you're a beginner, if you're just getting introduced to Jyotish. These days the emphasis on mathematics has got reduced because of softwares. So not many people get introduced to this kind of degree and minutes calculation. Well summed up, Pulak. However, if anyone has a confusion, anyone wants to know a little more, please feel free to write in the comment section, and we will come back to your comment. Anything like to add, KP?
Yeah, Sandeep, I really like the way you broke down the math for us and even the points that Pulak mentioned. But I was just wondering, what is the significance of the magical Iyer constant? Like, why is it 3 signs, 3 degrees, and 20 minutes?
Yeah, good point. I think this is something which even when I was studying with my teacher, I kind of asked the same question, and I said, is there a logic behind the 3-3-20? Because in his book, when I read his book, he does mention 3-3-20. He does not, however, mention 6-6-40, which is the Abyogi constant. He simply says, you count to the sixth and you arrive at the Abyogi as an opposite. Uh, but it's a backward derivation. So if you kind of work backwards, you get 6-6-40. Coming back to your point, 3-3-20. 3-3-20 would lie in Cancer, right? It lies in Cancer. It's the first Navamsha of Cancer. Each bhava has 9 divisions of 3
Yep.
degrees each. Each 3 degree 20 is also a pada of the nakshatra, 13 degrees 20. I know this will get technical, but for those of us who are interested in that part, you'll be aware of the fact that the nakshatra, which is in the first 3 degrees 20 of Cancer, is Pushya. And Pushya is the most auspicious nakshatra. So I think what Shadri Iyer is trying to indicate is, so he's kind of combining the Tithi calculation and then kind of adding a Pushya context to it. And maybe there's something of that kind in his mind which was there in his arriving at this particular point. So I think it's got something to do with Pushya Nakshatra. 3320 is the most auspicious point in horoscope in a Kalpurush Kundali, because that is the Pushya Nakshatra. So I think that's the 3320 which comes into play here.
Yeah, I was just thinking about this question as well, KP. It's a great question, and maybe this might be just my imagination. I don't know, right? So there are 9 padas in a sign, in the sense of 3 degrees 20 each. So 9 into 3.2 would become 30 degrees, right? So if you multiply it by 12, it comes to 108 padas, right? And if you take this Iyer constant, which is 3 signs, 3 degrees 20 minutes, it is 28 padas, right? So 3 signs will be 27 padas. You add 3 degrees 20, which is 28 padas. If you divide 108 by 28, right, it's basically so if I divide 108 by 27, which is one sign, the padas in one sign, it comes to 12 signs, right? Now, if I divide it by 28, what that means is it is taking 11 signs and all the padas in the 12 sign except the last pada. And I'm guessing that
Yep.
last pada is where the yogi point is, or whatever. It could be just a imaginative thing, but I thought, let me just voice it out anyways.
Yeah, Pulak, one thing, I
You're
mean,
on mute, by the way.
yeah. Yeah, Pulak, that's a very good point that you brought up. And it also shows our viewers that you are very good at math.
Pretty much, yeah.
My school marks don't seem to indicate that, but
Yeah, you were probably not running the right dasha when you were writing that math exam.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point, KP, that, when we talk about the yogi and the duplicate yogi or the
Mhm.
avyogi, it is very important to note that it's like any other Dhan Yoga, Raj Yoga that we've spoken of. You may have a lot of Dhan Yogas or Raj Yogas in a chart. They could be strong planets, it could repeat from the Chandra Lagna. However, if you don't have the right dasha sequence, if the dasha sequence is not supportive, then even you may have yogas, but then these yogas are in your dreams, right? You dream of money and power because it's there in your chart, but it never fructifies or materializes because you don't write you don't write the right dasha sequence. Like you said, I
Yep.
think a couple of episodes before, planets tell us what, dashas tell us when. Like our guru Mark Boni always says, planets tell us what, dashas tell us when. So, in the context of the yogi point, the dasha sequence remains as important. So, to have run the dasha of the yogi or the duplicate yogi at the right age is very important. Like we've seen in a lot of charts, and in my own case, if you run a Raj Yoga or a Dhan Yoga in your formative years, which is young ages, teenage, etc., when you haven't really gone out, your 10th house is not activated. You're not really still stepped out and kind of, doing some gainful work in the society. Uh, then the effects are passed on to your caretakers, which means I may not have experienced directly prosperity, but through my caretakers, because I'm a child. So for me to experience a Raj Yoga or Dhan Yoga, it would possibly happen to the caretakers' lives, and through them, I will experience it. So the dasha sequence becomes very important.
Sandeep, one question I had was, is there any significance of which house the yogi point falls into, or are we just looking at just the yogi and the duplicate yogi as the main triggers for
Very
prosperity?
important. Yeah, and a software does kind of mark out the yogi point, right? So let's make a distinction between the two. When we arrive at planets, Mercury, Moon, Mars could be the yogi, duplicate yogi, yogi, whichever planet. So it's a planet. planets are related to dasha sequences, right? So the dasha and the yogas that they make. The yogi point per se is a point in the chart, right? So does it have any relevance? Does it not have a relevance? It does, because now it kind of plays out in the transit sequence. So during transits in a year, for example, uh, you could have a Jupiter aspecting a yogi point or Jupiter transiting the yogi point. So those then become those, points or periods, shorter periods of time. You may not have the dasha of a yogi or antardasha of a duplicate yogi or a yogi, but in transits, if the lagna lord, the 10th lord, or the planets creating yogas are transiting the yogi point, those also become periods, short periods where you experience some kind of material gains. Now you could get a bonus in that month. You could get a Diwali gift from someone, or you could just get something from somewhere, and nothing very substantial because it's just a transit. It's not a long period where things will keep building and create a massive stacking of wealth. But yeah, these can be small periods of prosperity which one may experience. So, yogi point in the chart, pull up to summarize, is valid from a transits perspective. The planets are relevant from a dasha perspective.
Got it.
Yeah.
And is it possible for sort of for the yogi and the duplicate yogi not to be configured in a dhan yoga, which we covered in the previous episode,
Yeah.
and they are still eligible in bringing prosperity?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. In fact, I think the best thing to do is kind of look at examples, and examples are the best way to validate what we kind of want to experience. And that's something which I'll share with all my viewers, is that one of the best things we can do is not just learn a principle or an idea, but then try and take it across to charts and see how they apply. So let's try and look at
Sandeep, I think
Sandeep,
you're
you're
on
on
mute.
mute.
Yeah. So I'm going to switch on my video and I'll put out a chart, and maybe KP, you and Pulak can kind of start off with some analysis of the chart basics and see what's happening in the chart. And then let's look at what that person's destiny was like. Yeah.
Sure.
So this is a chart, right? This is the D1 chart of a person. And some of the data is already given out there. I'm going to stop my video so that the screen is bigger for everyone. Yeah. Okay. So, any thoughts? Any thoughts and comments on the chart? When we did talk about it, I selected this chart and I thought I'll just share it with you and kind of take your comments on it before we uh, do a detailed discussion.
Yeah, Sandeep, I mean, the eighth house looks really powerful because it has quite strong Raj Yogas in there. There is a 9-10 Raj Yoga
Mm-hmm.
with Venus and Mars
Yeah.
conjunction.
Yeah.
And even, I mean, the eighth house itself, it's like Mercury in its own sign,
Yeah.
exalted.
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff happening in the eighth house. Yeah. Absolutely.
And I'm also looking at your notes there. I see that the yogi for this chart happens to be Saturn, and the duplicate yogi is the moon. And what's interesting is Mars, Venus, as well as Saturn,
Mm-hmm.
they are in moon's nakshatra.
Yeah. 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 And the Abyogi is Moon too now. Is that,
Yeah, I noticed that too.
I mean, is that possible? Yeah, it's possible. Because remember,
Yep.
the Abyogi and the Yogi are nakshatra points. They're points in the zodiac, and they fall into some nakshatra, and the lords can be common.
Yep.
The duplicate Yogi is the sign lord. He's the lord of the sign in which the yogi is. So they can be same. It's a possibility that they could be the same. However, you never find the yogi and the abyogi to be the same planet. Yeah. So
Right.
nothing to worry about that.
Yeah, and
And,
for viewers, I think The way we calculated Saturn and Moon is the Yogi point, as you can see, is in the sign of Cancer in the sixth house, and it's falling in the nakshatra of Saturn, which in this case happens to be the Lagna Lord, and it's in the sign of Moon because Moon rules Cancer, so Moon becomes the duplicate Yogi.
Yeah. So, a quick analysis for all of us. I've made the notes at the bottom, and we'll proceed in that direction. So, one of the first things we look for in a chart is, the strength of the lagna and the lagna lord, because that's very important. So, we have an unafflicted lagna lord Saturn, who's retrograde. Retrograde being a strength for a planet. It's a raw strength. It forms a Kahala Yoga, which is the dispositor of the Lagna Lord is exalted, not in an angle or a trine. We would like it to be there, but being exalted is a Kahala like yoga. There are only malefics in the Kendras, so does show some struggle, does show some ups and downs, does show some amount of misfortune, first level indicator. The Lagna is in Dhanishta, which is the nakshatra, wealth, fame, prosperity, shine. It's also the symbol is drum. Drum is like, sound, your name and fame spreads across. So Dhanishta is a great nakshatra for the ascendant to be. The yogas which are formed, again, in that eighth house are primarily by Venus, Mars, and Mercury. If you look at the ownerships of Mercury, it owns the fifth house, Venus owns the ninth house, Mars owns the 10th house. And those are the planets which are forming some wonderful Raj Yogas and Dhan Yogas. So I've listed them out for our viewers. You can kind of, check back on the recording and then verify how the yogas are getting formed. Basis our first two episodes that we covered. So there are so many of these yogas, right? So this is actually a very powerful chart. Now we may look at the eighth house and say, that so many planets in the eighth house, and there could be a doomsday picture. Jupiter in the sixth house, so like it's struggle, disease, illness. But one thing we must remember, and I think Pulak also spoke about it in the Dhan Yoga and the Raj Yoga episodes, that doesn't matter where they get formed. Yeah, if they are getting formed, they will play out in their dashas. Of course, there would be some of the house themes which will play through them. So that's a different topic. Coming back here, we saw the yogi and the aviyogi, and this gentleman runs the dasha sequence. Now, dasha sequence becomes very important. Dasha sequence is Rahu till the age of 13. So that's the early teen years, still school, maybe. Yeah, so early school. Rahu is giving the results of Sun, which is in the eighth house, configured in a Raj Yoga. So it's a pretty decent planet. It's not all that bad. It is change and transformation, sure. It's the seventh house going to the eighth. He's a kid, so at that point in time, he goes away from home to study. That's also Saturn in the fourth house. Saturn in the fourth house is a malefic. Some amount of stuff happens. He then enters Jupiter from 13 to 29. So he's going to finish college and he's going to start getting into work, early years of work, and he's going to try and find what to do. Now we see Jupiter in the sixth of obstacles, of difficulties, of challenges, and stuff like that. And that's what kind of the person does go through. So it's only late towards his end of the Jupiter dasha that he wants to change direction, wants to do something in life. In the area of entertainment and films, releases his first movie called Anand, has 6 or 7 flops after that. He's almost being written off from the industry. And then comes Saturn. Now, Saturn is the yogi. Saturn is in the nakshatra of the duplicate yogi. So that's a double qualification for Saturn. It's an unafflicted Lagna Lord looking back at the Lagna. So this is a very, very, powerful Saturn now. And as the dasha operates, it starts in 71, mid or late 71. 73 is the first movie he releases called Zanjeer. And then he's made history after that. He runs post that Saturn, he gets into Mercury. Mercury in the 8th house, 8th lord. We can expect trouble. Yes, a lot of trouble happened to Amitabh Bachchan at that point in time. He kind of almost got bankrupt, had to take loans, was running pillar to post to kind of figure out what to do. And then he started his Ketu Dasha, right? So Mercury did give some results. It's not that the whole of Mercury was bad, because Mercury is participating in some of those wonderful Raj Yogas, Dhan Yogas. So Mercury did kind of help out in bits and pieces. But his Ketu Dasha again turned out to be phenomenal, because Ketu is again in the how in the Lagna, behaving like Saturn and behaving like this Jupiter, no, Saturn. And Saturn we saw was a wonderful ride. And that's when Amitabh kind of, reinvents himself. He's back in the movies, he's doing different kinds of roles. Ketu is again, that planet of change and transformation. He kind of makes you reinvent yourself. He runs Ketu, and then now he's running his Venus Dasha. Venus is again in the nakshatra of Moon, who's the duplicate yogi, avyogi. So things are kind of, when you have a avyogi yogi combo or something of that kind combining, there could be some, a wave-like pattern in prosperity. But yeah, pretty much, Pulak, the question you asked, if a planet is not configured in Raj Yogas or Dhan Yogas, by itself in its dasha, can it give outstanding results? And we see Saturn in this case. Saturn is not in any Dhan Yoga, Raj Yogas. However, being a yogi and being in the nakshatra of the duplicate yogi becomes doubly powerful to give wealth in its period. Any thoughts you have, something I may have missed, you may want to add on, please feel free.
Yeah, just a couple of observations from my side. I think Saturn, of course, becomes the yoga karaka both from the Chandra Lagna and from the Dasha Lagna. And so in addition to the fact that from the Lagna it was forming a 1-4 Raja Yoga, both from Chandra Lagna and Dasha Lagna, it becomes a good yoga karaka planet. And then the other observation was that there's obviously a 310 connection both from the Lagna, because from the Lagna, Mars rules both the third house of sort of artistic talents and the 10th house of career. And then from the Chandra Lagna, Jupiter rules the third house of the same, placed in the 10th house. The other point, I think there was one clarification which I wanted to make. I think uh, this won't be a Kahala Yoga because the dispositor of the Lagna Lord is actually debilitated. Will it be a Kahala Yoga or no? I
I don't think it is Kala Yoga
yeah.
So,
because
dispositor of the Lagna Lord being Venus is debilitated for sure. And so that would make a Parvata Yoga. In this case, it doesn't. The dispositor of the dispositor
Dispositor of the dispositor will
is,
make it a Kahala Yoga, but it's not in an angle.
it's not an angle trine. So I said it's a Kahala like.
Okay, got it.
We won't,
Yep.
I wouldn't ignore a strength coming to the Lagna. I would kind of, keep it in the back of my mind saying, it's not that brilliant, but can I completely ignore it? No, I won't. I'll just kind of keep it in the back of my mind that there is potential.
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah. So that
and
was,
Sandeep, for me, it was really interesting how the Dasha sequence panned out, and like how there was like obviously sudden rise in the wealth, fame, as well as prosperity during the Saturn period. And Saturn being the yogi, it definitely gave the results. Other than the points that Polak mentioned, because I mean, obviously from Moon Lagna as well as the Dasha Lagna, Saturn becomes a yoga karak, but the fact that it's also configured as a yogi kind of explains the yogi principle.
and that's one of the things of astrology, that you're looking at a planet stacking up to give results. So, if not from the Lagna, from the Chandra Lagna, from the Surya Lagna, the planet has the potential, he has the qualities, and then he becomes the yogi. Then he's in the, this thing of the avyogi, of the duplicate yogi. So now you've got multiple reasons to say that Saturn Dasha has to be very good for this person. That brings me to another very interesting chart. Okay. Now, this one is a little more complex. And what is very interesting is, of course, the yoga planets are, these three. One of the things that strikes out for this chart is, if you look at the number of planets which are Swarashi or exalted. So you've got Mars, you've got Saturn, you've got Moon, you've got Sun. So we've got 4 planets which are either, and then Mercury on top of that, right? Lagna Lord in the Lagna, exalted. We've got 5 planets, Swa or exalted in a chart. And in BPHS, in miscellaneous Raj Yogas, if you read, it says 3 or more planets, Swa or exalted, is a Raj Yoga by itself. Yeah, because what is indicating is strength. Strong planets in a chart, they will give their results, strongly. And if they are in a dignity, which is better, the results tend to be a little more benign than, bad. So that's one thing that stands out. Mercury and Venus form, of course, a couple of the 9-10 and then the 1-9 and 1-10. So there's a whole lot of Raj Yogas getting formed here. There is the Chandra Mangala Yoga between Moon and Mars. Yeah. There is a Khyati Yoga, Musala Yoga. There is a Kesari Yoga. Yeah. There is, of course, concern for the 4th bhava because Jupiter is in a bad house. It's hemmed by malefics, and then Moon is under pressure from Mars. So there is the 4th house issues. 7th house has some issues again because the Rahu Ketu Venus, Jupiter is in a negative house, again hemmed by malefics. And then you have Venus in the Rahu Ketu axis. So the 4th and 7th are disturbed for sure, but that's not where we want to go today. We want to come back to this whole yogi and duplicate yogi configuration. Now, the first thing we see is Moon and Saturn, duplicate yogi, Abyogi, Mercury. So we've got a different thing. The ascendant, now what we notice interestingly is the ascendant point itself, Mercury itself, Venus itself, and Rahu itself. All 4 of them are in the nakshatra of the yogi. Okay, that is something interesting. Now, what we then see is Ketu is in Saturn's star. So all of these planets, ascendant, the Lagna Lord, the Moon, Venus, Rahu, and Ketu, all of these planets are associated with the yogi or the duplicate yogi. Okay. One of the principles for that, maybe in the next episode, we will come back to you with a more deeper study of, maybe the principles, and we'll share some of the principles of how to apply all this. The ascendant being in the yogi nakshatra is awesome. The Lagna Lord being in the yogi nakshatra is awesome. All these planets and Saturn and Ketu. Now, there is a bit of a conflict. Okay, the conflict is that the Lagna Lord is the Avyogi himself. Now, so does that kind of, change the whole thing? But then, like in Jyotisha, we always talk about confluence and we talk about, stacking negatives and positives and then saying which one tends to dominate, and those are the kind of results which are most likely, is where we see that, yeah, the Lagna Lord is the Avyogi, but it is in the yogi nakshatra. The ascendant is in the yogi nakshatra. Rahu is in a yogi nakshatra. Venus is in a yogi. So all of these positives kind of, and then Mercury and Venus are also in some of the most powerful Raj Yogas for this chart. So this one Avyogi is a one small factor there, right? And there are so many of these positives which are kind of overarching this negative. So do we ignore it completely? Not really, but do we give it too much of importance? No, right? So we kind of just say, yeah, there is something, but the positives far outweigh the whole thing. And again, all of these yogas and all of these yogi points and avyogi points, and now look at the dasha sequence. So this woman starts her moon dasha, which is like the first dasha here. Obviously, we know home, disturbance. So there is challenge at home. These are the childhood years. Yeah, so there is that thing that happens. She has to, they travel, her father, and they migrate. So they immigrate into the US. In her moon dasha, she immigrates, they land up in the US. She grows up there in the Mars dasha. Mars is a strong, nice planet. Mars is not configured except for Chandramangala Yoga. There is a Chandramangala Yoga that Mars is definitely, configured in. Uh, it is the eighth lord, so in the third house there is some. It's going to give out the themes of change, uh, you know. And she grows up to her teen years, not the most comfortable life, but formative years, and she gets into Rahu. Rahu is acting like all of these Raj Yoga planets, and that is when her career begins to take off. Like Palak said, eighth lord in the eighth, fifth in the fifth, Lagna lord in the Lagna. Pretty much these houses of creativity, performing arts, Lagna is very strong. Venus in the Lagna, Mercury in the Lagna, again, planets related to performing arts. She is an artist, she is a film star, runs the Rahu Dasha, starts becoming super famous, right? She starts off in the era of silent movies and grows to a star, right? Soon after that, gets into the Jupiter Dasha, right? Jupiter here is not indicating anything very phenomenal for her. But yeah, is the Lord of 4th and 12th with Sun, nothing else really happening. But let's not forget, there's a nice little Kesari Yoga here, right? So Jupiter kind of gives out the Kesari Yoga results. She continues to form a career, then gets into Saturn, who's the duplicate yogi, and has ever since, till the time she, I think, almost kind of retired, very late age, she continued to be a very strong superstar. So wealth, again, this Rahu period was what got her into the momentum. Rahu is acting like the yogas, the Dhani yogas, and Rahu happens to be in the yogi trine. The ascendant is in the yogi trine. Lagna Lord is in the yogi trine. I mean, wealth and prosperity is at this woman's beck and command. This is the chart from Astro Data Bank of a lady called Claudette Colbert. Claudette Colbert was an actress in the silent movies. She kind of migrated to black and white early movies, at that time. Absolute megastar of our times, and a very, very rich person, obviously. Right. So again, the dasha sequence, the yogas, and then how many of those yoga planets kind of get mounted on top by becoming yogi or associated with yogis, kind of creates the magic. Any thoughts or comments, guys? uh, I'm kind of pretty much through with what I wanted to share with all of you. Pulak, KP, any thoughts from your side?
This is
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the dasha sequence is again quite interesting. And also, I mean, Rahu is, I mean, obviously in the nakshatra of the yogi, along with Mercury and Venus. Mercury and Venus both forming that strong ninth and Raja Yoga. So definitely, I mean, the Rahu period got her a lot of fame as well as prosperity.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and this is a great explanation, Sandeep. I think interestingly, just as a side thing, she was born in France and she migrated to the US. So there's also that 412 connection and then Rahu Ketu in the 1-7 axis. I just thought I'll just mention.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We've seen in so many cases that the 12th house, the 4th house, the Lagna, that these connections kind of, take you in a certain direction in life. And then the 3rd house, 5th house, Lagna, that's another direction, pretty much a direction for performing artists and musicians and all of that. Absolutely. Absolutely. So with that, I think for the paucity of time, we'll leave it at 2 charts, and possibly in the next episode, if there are some comments and questions, we'd love to answer those for all our viewers. This is just an introduction. This is, don't, just jump into, saying that the Avyogi period is coming up, things are going to be disastrous. Not at all. We saw how the Lagna Lord being a Avyogi, still the kind of experience the person has had is superfluous. So viewers, please be careful. Step 1, look at the Lagna Lord. Step 2, identify as many yogas as you can. See which are the planets which are participating in yogas. The more the yogas that a planet participates in, the better the results it will give in its period. And then, of course, you can add on top is the layering of the yogi and the duplicate yogis, and then the dasha sequence. So, kind of look at it from that perspective, look at it as a narrative rather than kind of, looking at one single factor and saying it's going to be good or bad, right? Don't be a Facebook astrologer, right? I mean, I find it hilarious what goes on there. So let's look at it more holistically. Let's look at it from in a certain manner, and then arrive at conclusions. Any concluding comments, Pulak, KP?
Yeah, Sandeep, I mean, I would just like to say, like, thanks to our viewers. We are having a lot of fun making these videos, and we definitely look forward to next week when we'll be back with something new.
Wonderful. Pulak, any closing comments from your side?
No, great session, Sandeep. Thank you for doing so much of research on this and sharing it with our viewers. I think pretty certain people will derive a lot of insights from this episode.
Wonderful. So with that, I think it's a bye from the Jyotish Network. And until next Saturday, we come back with another topic and look forward to meeting you all. Goodbye and sayonara.
Thanks, everyone.